Viva!
Viva Maimane, viva!
Viva!
A lot of what's wrong in South Africa can be seen here in Gugulethu. People struggle to get jobs and decent housing. Crime is a major concern. It's not only the ruling ANC's failures on display. This is Cape Town, the city that the main opposition says they run better. Some communities are turning to new, smaller political parties for help. The people at this rally are pinning their hopes on Mmusi Maimane and his party BOSA, or Build One South Africa.
A job in every home.
He was once called the Obama of Soweto, the black leader of the main opposition, the Democratic Alliance, a historically white party. But then he left the DA to go his own way. I'm with Mmusi Maimane on the campaign trail in Gugulethu, ahead of one of South Africa's most important elections in 30 years.
Electioneering is like a different machine. It's like fighting a war.
You don't have a red beret, you have a white hard hat.
I'm a builder, man. I'm trying to build here. That's what I'm trying to do. We've got a country to build. Let's build it.
These people are used to politicians coming in and making promises and then going away and coming back 5 years later. What makes you different?
We're not building transactionally just for these elections. We're also building for the long-term sustainability of genuinely empowering communities to do things for themselves. So in some ways, I don't just see myself as a political leader, but I see myself in some ways as being able to, if you like, help democratize access. People in communities are resourceful. South Africans are resourceful. They do stuff. They'll do things for themselves. But sometimes there are little things that they can't gain access to. And the privilege of my life is that because I've been able to interact with all of the South Africans in that way, wealthy, rich, poor, black, white, I'm able to go actually, like practical example. On Sunday, we go to this community. I arrive there, there's an orphanage there without electricity. Now I happen to know the solar building companies. I can pick up the phone and go, hey, can you pitch tomorrow and install a solar panel out of your CSI budget? Because you can. Now, that community isn't going to do that for itself, but I can because I've got access to people.
Right.
One of the things that apartheid bequeathed to us is an exiling not only from oneself but from one another. So people don't know what sits on the other side of the fence. That's why you hear South Africans who talk about the South Africa they grew up in and they don't share values.
Right.
Like that's why I want a national civilian service. Not because I think two young people need to spend a year doing something. But in that year, the big lesson that you learn in that year is that you share experiences. You share experiences with someone who doesn't look like you.
Because it's like a conscription, but not an army, not for an army.
In the words of Jacob Zuma, absolutely. I never thought I'd quote Jacob. But those things in nation building and story building, as it were. Because countries need a few things. They need, of course, an economy that works. They need an education system. They need an administration that works. But they need to know their story. It's what builds a sense of national unity and goals that are shared across. So that when I walk around, whether the South African is black, white, Indian, or colored, I go, actually, we've got a shared story. So how do I find myself in that story and how do I contribute to it? Countries that win on that basis.
So we're in Gugulethu, it has a lot of poverty. There's shacks just over there. I mean, there's a mix of different types of housing and so on. My daughter, when she was 8, a few years ago, and she'd grown up in the US and Turkey, the first time she saw an informal settlement, we were driving through Cape Town, she asked me, Papa, how? Why do people live in shacks? Took me 2 hours to answer that. I'm assuming you're better equipped. Why do people live in shacks here?
They live in shacks because we did two things strategically wrong. We failed We have provinces that are failing. And so what happens is that, as is a global trend, your big cities, Joburg, Cape Town, and eThekwini, suffer from net in-migration. So invariably, when people are seeking work opportunities, health opportunities, etc., they end up on the periphery of cities, and cities can't cope with being able to put housing infrastructure, etc. They don't urbanize that way. So as a result of that, you end up with people just finding and putting up what historically were temporary structures on the way to being permanent structures, but the government never caught up with that. Secondly, we haven't really built new cities. So I think that if I took over government, one of the things that you see all over the world is that you urbanize through transport and building new cities. And the ultimate thing is, let's learn from other countries. It's a misnomer to promise people you're going to build them houses. What I would much rather be invested in is going, okay, when you and I want to buy a house, what do? We go to a bank, we say, give us money. And then once you've got money or you don't have money, you go find a house and you say to the bank, can you marry these two things? What the state needs to do is to become an underwriter of transaction and empower people to build for themselves, because people can. People are resourceful. So if you said to me, okay, an RDP house costs me 300,000.
And that's a basic reconstruction and development program.
Program house.
Government program.
Like it said, I'm going to voucherize it. You go buy the equipment, build, we'll allocate title, develop in communities. You can build your own house. And then once you've done that through geolocation, which is what India is doing, you take pictures, you subscribe, I can triangulate those two things and then pump more cash into it so that you eradicate two things. One, you eradicate government corruption, which is happening in housing. And two, you give people choice. Why should poor people not have choice? All houses look exactly the same. It's like an apartheid model.
It's the very end of Ramadan as we talk. It's like the last day of Ramadan. And you've been invited to an iftar.
Yes.
So it's not only going to be religion and interfaith and loving each other. They're probably going to ask you about Palestine as well while you're there.
Yeah.
Are you prepared? What is actually your view? You're not a member of the ANC, you're not a member of the DA, who have two very specific views on this issue in Gaza right now.
Yeah.
You've had, 6 months to formulate your thoughts on what's happened since October 7th. Of course, that's not when it began, but what are your thoughts? Where does Mmusi Maimane stand on this?
The first thing is, I think we need to all be unified globally on the call for a ceasefire. I'm not convinced that violence and what is going on there is going to resolve the situation. I've been to both sides, so I speak from a position of having been to Ramallah and having been to Israel in that sense. I think that both sides, and I know it may seem insurmountable as things stand at the moment, that we'll end up with a two-state solution, but I happen to think the region itself requires that. I think that we need to stand united, both whether you are on the side of Palestinians or whether you're on the side of Israelis. You need to recognize the fact that a two-state solution is the only viable solution at this point in time, that we need to collectively call the region in its entirety, not only the immediate conflict that's there, to be able to find a lasting solution. And half the reason I don't think we found a lasting solution has been inherently because the broader region is not in conversation, whether it be Iran, whether it be all the other pockets. And I happen to think that where points like occupied territories, we need to be able to extract. We need to make sure that when we stick to the principles of what is a two-state solution, we need to uphold the rule of law and make sure that both sides effectively in their needs, in what they want, they can be able to get.
Do you think South Africa did the right thing by putting it to the International Court of Justice to ask the question of whether Israel has committed genocide since it began its bombardment of the Gaza Strip?
I wish that it was sincere.
What do you mean?
I think when I look at South Africa's own position and South Africa's own role, I'm not sure they're seeking out justice and fairness. I think that the government's position had, because it's inconsistent, right?
But if it leads to a ceasefire, who cares if South Africa was sincere or not? I mean, we don't know America's intentions when it intervened in Kosovo, but it saved the lives of the Kosovo Albanians and stopped the Serbs from bombing them.
So if I let the South African government, our strongest arsenal and historical learning would have actually been arrived in the middle of the conflict, call both sides together to be able to find a negotiated settlement out of there. The court process will find what the court process will find. I can't comment on it. But I happen to think that our biggest arsenal and strength as a country has been able to, and I've always said that, I think that South Africa has taught that in the most heinous crime of apartheid, we're able to find a peaceful solution through that.
This image of Cape Town is one that the world is more used to seeing. The leafy suburbs are stark contrast with the conditions in Gugulethu. In this more private space, Mmusi Maimane explained more about the challenges facing South Africa and his realistic chances of playing a role in solving them. What's the problem with South Africa, Mmusi Maimane?
I think fundamentally, South Africa is one of the countries that have last experienced liberation in the SADC region, is undergoing a phase upon which there's a maturation of a liberation movement. It, like any other, is failing the test of governance, and it is ultimately delivering a society at which the meta story is a story of liberation, but the lived experience is a story of a party that now is, as Harvard report has already indicated, that the conditions for black South Africans living in Bantustans are no different today. Young people are not finding work. 2 out of 3 young people are unemployed. Unemployment levels amongst youth are at 70%. Our educational outcomes, in my humble opinion, have worsened from the perspective that actually we are asking young people to pass at 30%. Our skill levels as far as workforce is concerned is delivering in comparative to other developing countries. We rank much lower. In our reading ability, polls have indicated that 8 out of 10 of our children cannot read for meaning by the age of 10. So these are clear indicators of, if you like, decent start for a country post-liberation 1994, a fairly weak, if not atrocious, middle period of that. And now we're in the final thirds of effectively asking existential questions about the future of South Africa and as far as governance is concerned and where we go economically. So this is a very important period for South Africa.
You're saying the right things. Do you have any regrets that you could have been saying them at the helm of a party that was getting a quarter of the vote, and now you're back to the beginning and building a movement from the ground up without that leverage, without that power, without that platform that the largest opposition party had?
Yeah, I think that part of the problem with this 30-year moment is that we are almost seeing the culmination of both, if you like, the nationalist parties, being the African National, and the DA. You wouldn't obviously from the front class it in the same way, but in actual fact, the DA is now a party that is minority nationalism, if I could use it.
But when you say minority,
and by
you
that,
mean
what I
white,
mean,
don't you?
I do mean
Yeah,
white, and with a component of Indian South Africans and colored South Africans, but certainly not inclusive of the broader majority of South Africans, which are black South Africans. So when you look at it in that sense, it is quite anomalous that we sit on the eve of one of the most significant elections this country will hold, and both the ANC and the DA are struggling. That tells you that in essence, what South Africa needs are parties that emerge in the new South Africa. When we started Build One South Africa, it was intentional to address two things: a vision of what happens post-liberation politics or post the ANC, and secondly, it was a vision born out of the fact that in the multiplicity of South Africas, whether that's rich, poor, whether that's urban, rural, all of that combination, could you build a movement that is reflective of the society as it is and project for the long term? So we're not a surrogate, if you like, of any of the establishments currently. We are a new formation, building with South Africans who are, for many of them, want to see this vision of the new South Africa thrive. So I'm not regretful of having left that. I'm much more enthusiastic about going in a world of politics where change is quick, actually. You don't have to build a 100-year lifeline to be able to make a significant impact. I look at elections all over the world. You can think about the US elections. You can think about elections in France. You can look at elections in Senegal. Recently, you can look at elections in Zambia. You can see these quick changes where leaders are emerging that carry new visions for their nations and take them forward. That's the job I want to do.
EFF. Can you learn something from them in how they went from 0 to what, between 10 and 15%, and have a very clear idea of what they're doing, and love them or hate them, you know what they are and what they represent?
There again,
They're a political machine.
here's the courage of stepping away from your own past, starting something, and being there. So in your examples of what parties that have started have looked like, I think it's also, you can't discount them. So that the key lessons are about, of course, be clear about which constituency you want to work with, be clear about your longevity in that, and I'm convinced about that we have a constituency of South Africans who are between the ages of 18 to 40 that want to vote for BOSA. But one of the big lessons that the EFF brought on the table is that they made the drum with which they beat for everyone to march to land. BOSA, we are very clear that the fix for this country is about educating of our citizens. We have to skill this country. It cannot be today that the prospects of a child in Soweto and the prospects of a child in Stellenbosch, both one black, one white, one wealthy, one poor, are still exactly the same today in a democratic South Africa. So when you look at educational outcomes in this country, I certainly believe that there is a profound injustice. So the big lesson here for me is that the drum we want South Africans to march to is actually addressing the educational inequalities. My problem with what the EFF are doing is that they make a race a problem, not a system a problem. My thesis is that it is inherently possible for a white South African to care about the plight of a black child. If that is impossible, then we must give up on humanity. In truth, I happen to think that if you build politics that are inclusive, which the founders, even of the ANC, perhaps even if you head towards 1964, etc., believed that what people like Mandela stood for, what people like Martin Luther King stood for, you can today, that vision must still be confronted and fought for. So today in 2024, I'm saying Mmusi Maimane is in the struggle that is continuing that lineage of leaders all over the world who stood up and said, look, let's recognize the fact that yes, we have a racial inequality problem, but the solution must be indeed to build an inclusive society upon which people must care. I am married to a white South African. It would be a bit anomalous of me not to believe that she has within herself the capacity to care for the plight of a black child. The converse is not actually to make it racial, it's to make it tribal. And then you arrive in KwaZulu-Natal, where suddenly you've got tribalism that eventually delivers violence at levels that South Africa can least afford.
The tribalism connected to the former president with his new party.
Of course.
How much damage do you think Jacob Zuma did to the country during the state capture years? You were there, you were in parliament, you were the official opposition, you were fighting.
Profound damage.
Do you sometimes feel, and you can answer, you didn't fully answer the question here, I didn't give you an opportunity, but I want to fold in this idea. Do you sometimes feel like you regret how you battled him and that maybe you could have battled him in a different way? And I tell you why I say this, because from the outside looking in, living outside of South Africa looking in, there's Mmusi Maimane giving a strong speech. You're a broken man presiding over a broken society. It's a stirring speech in parliament. But this Zuma had this kind of roguishness that he could spin it around and be charismatic with it and sort of turn it on you. And he gets up and he goes, oh, I'm a broken president. There was something about him that always found a way of taking what you pushed up against him and making hay. Making light. I don't know, maybe it's Trumpian. Maybe he was Trumpian before Trump. Do you sometimes?
I think he definitely was.
Do you sometimes look back and think I could have battled him differently in Parliament?
I don't regret the battles against Jacob Zuma. Perhaps the regret I hold is that we almost at the same time as that gave the broader ANC a free pass. Because it is tempting when you say, well, this is Zuma's ANC, to also tell the electorate, remove Zuma, Ramaphosa will be better.
Zuma must fall, Zuma must fall. He fell, the problems are still there. Right.
So that for me is the dilemma. We must give the ANC a collective scorecard that says Ramaphosa was there during state capture, that says that Mmusi was there during the Zuma years and the educational outcomes are the same. The dilemma was that we've almost, as one of the political commentators said, narrowed the argument around state capture, argued within that narrow space vehemently, but ignored the broader issues of society, which were the fact that 75 South Africans today will be murdered. And the same will be true tomorrow and the day thereafter. So, in essence, I want to look at it now as a referendum on the ANC. It's not a referendum on Ramaphosa. Because, again, we could make the same mistake of just simply saying, let's remove Ramaphosa and put someone else. It'll be okay. It doesn't work like that. This is the Cape Town that's hidden, right?
So there's no service delivery, there's open sewage here, there's pollution. It's a health risk for the people here. And the government's not doing anything about it. The children are playing around here.
They're even playing with this water.
And Mmusi, you say it's the hidden Cape Town, and it's to your point that you were making to me, as when you were within the DA doesn't really want to deal with this, but they're more willing to deal with the problems of who they consider to be their real constituents.
Yeah, and in part, this is the bit that also worries me, is the recent remarks by the leader of the DA when he says people mustn't come and campaign in the Western Cape because the Western Cape works, at least. Right.
Yes.
And I'm like, it works. We can't keep the belief that there's parity of service because we only show the Western Cape that's wealthy and affluent. We've got to also recognize, as much as I celebrate cities like Cape Town in their international standing and it's important for tourism, so there's a dynamic in me that of course wants us to showcase the best of South Africa, but we must also recognize the journey of government and ensuring that no South African lives like this. When I think about kids and I think about my own kids, no child must live like this. I wouldn't accept my kids living like this. I wouldn't accept anyone's kids living like this. And ultimately, the journey that we're on in South Africa is that at one level, you want these globally recognized cities. And on another level, you must make sure that services are delivered equitably, that there's a sense of justice and there's a dignity that is restored here. Because what dignity is there when people live like this?
So we can expose this now, the mess, the filth, the lack of service, the fact that children have to live in and inhabit this environment that's terribly detrimental to their health, to the people here. What can you do about it?
Well, I can change the government. To be honest with you, it's why I joined politics, because I can't build a toilet in this house. This is a sanitation, this is a block sewage. I can't do anything about it. Private citizens can't. This is where government failure looks like. And unless you change the government, there's nothing a private citizen can do. We have to change the government.
And there was something you were saying off camera, and you were asking rhetorically to the ma'am here about whether this would be the situation at Bishop's Court, which is a very beautiful leafy suburb. The implication being?
The implication being that the government of South Africa, as the ANC, governs as though Black lives don't matter. That's it. That's how they govern. In their heads, this is voting cattle, and we've got to look after others. That's it.